My wife disconnected my 65-year-old mom's hospital alarm. I don't want mother-in-law, she said. Nurses found her flatlined 20 minutes later. Made sure she paid for it. Look, I'm not the kind of guy who cries at movies or gets all emotional when a commercial shows a puppy reuniting with its owner. But when my mom hit the ground like a sack of potatoes in her backyard, I'm pretty sure my soul left my body for a solid 10 seconds. Grace Thompson, my mom, the woman who once fought off a raccoon with nothing but a broom and her signature death glare, was lying there in the dirt, her watering can still spraying the hydrangeas like nothing had happened. For a split second, I thought maybe she'd just tripped over her own stubbornness, which honestly wouldn't have surprised anyone who knew her. The woman was 65 going on immortal, the type who'd argue with the Grim Reaper and win on a technicality. But this wasn't a trip. This wasn't her being dramatic because I forgot to call her back last Tuesday. This was real, and it was terrifying in that way that makes your stomach feel like it's trying to escape through your throat. I called 911 so fast I'm pretty sure I broke some kind of speed dialing record, and while I waited for the ambulance, I just sat there in the grass next to her, holding her hand and trying not to lose my mind. She came to after a minute or so, groggy and confused, asking me why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. "Mom," I said, "you just collapsed. We're going to the hospital." She rolled her eyes, actually rolled her eyes while lying in the dirt, and muttered something about me being overdramatic. Classic Grace Thompson. The woman could be on death's doorstep and still find time to roast me. The hospital was a blur of white walls, fluorescent lights that could give anyone a migraine, and that weird antiseptic smell that makes you feel like you're trapped in a science experiment. They rushed her into the ER, hooked her up to more machines than a NASA control room, and told me to wait. So I waited, and waited, and stress ate 3 bags of vending machine chips that tasted like cardboard and regret. Finally, Dr. Patel came out, looking like someone who'd just finished delivering bad news to at least 5 other families that day. He was a small guy with kind eyes and the sort of calm demeanor that probably kept him from losing it when patients asked him to Google their symptoms. "Mr. Thompson," he said, and I immediately knew I wasn't going to like whatever came next. "Doctors never start with your name unless they're about to drop a bomb. Your mother's heart is very weak. We ran several tests, and the results show significant deterioration. She's going to need surgery soon, and even after that, she'll require careful monitoring. This isn't something we can ignore or put off." I'm pretty sure I stopped breathing for a second. Heart surgery. My mom, the woman who'd survived raising me as a single parent, 3 recessions, 2 knee replacements, and that one time she accidentally ate expired mayonnaise and still made it to her book club meeting. How serious are we talking? I asked, because apparently my brain decided that was the most intelligent question I could muster. Dr. Patel didn't sugarcoat it. Very serious. Without intervention, her prognosis isn't good. But with surgery and proper care, she has a strong chance of recovery. Your mother's tough? I can tell. That'll work in her favor. He gave me a small, reassuring smile, the kind doctors probably practice in medical school, and then left me standing there trying to process the fact that my mom's heart was giving out. I called Miranda immediately. My wife. The love of my life. The woman who'd promised to stick with me through thick and thin, sickness and health. All that wedding vow stuff people say, but don't always mean. She answered on the 4th ring, which should have been my first clue that this conversation wasn't going to go well. "Hey babe," I said, my voice shaking a little because I was still in shock. "Mom collapsed. We're at the hospital. It's her heart. She needs surgery." Silence. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of TikTok in the background. You know that annoying audio that goes viral every other week? Yeah, that one. "Miranda, are you listening?" I asked, feeling my blood pressure rising. Yeah, I'm listening," she said, but her tone suggested otherwise. "That sucks. Is she okay? She needs heart surgery, Miranda. This could be serious." Another pause. More TikTok sounds. I wanted to reach through the phone and throw her device into the nearest body of water. "Look, babe, I'm really sorry, but hospitals freak me out. Like, seriously freak me out. All those beeping machines and sick people and weird smells. I can't do it. And besides," she added, and here's where it got fun, "your mom's never really liked me anyway, so I doubt she'd want me there." I should have been surprised, but honestly, I wasn't. Miranda and my mom had been locked in a Cold War since the day they met. It started innocently enough, Mom made her famous apple pie, the one that had won 3 county fair ribbons and made grown men weep with joy. Miranda took one bite, made a face like she'd just chewed aluminum foil, and said, "It's chewy." 3 syllables. That's all it took to start World War III in the Thompson family. Mom never forgave her, and Miranda never apologized. From that day forward, every family gathering was a passive-aggressive battlefield where compliments were weapons and silence was a strategy. Mom thought Miranda was spoiled, lazy, and allergic to anything resembling hard work. Miranda thought Mom was overbearing, judgmental, and stuck in the past. I thought therapy might help. Turns out, I was the only one delusional enough to believe that. "This isn't about you two not getting along," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is about my mom possibly dying. Can you just, I don't know, put aside your issues for 5 minutes?" She sighed like I'd just asked her to climb Mount Everest in heels. "Fine, I'll come by later, but I'm not staying long." She hung up before I could respond, and I stood there in the hospital hallway, phone in hand, wondering how I'd ended up marrying someone who treated my mother's life-threatening medical emergency like an inconvenience. But there wasn't time to dwell on it. Dr. Patel scheduled Mom's surgery for the following morning, and I spent the rest of the night sitting by her bedside, watching her sleep and praying to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in anymore. She looked so small in that hospital bed, so fragile, and for the first time in my life, I realized my mom wasn't invincible. She was human, mortal, and that scared the hell out of me. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about time, how much we had left, and whether I'd been wasting it trying to keep peace between two people who'd rather wage war. But as I sat there listening to the machines beep and hum, I made a promise. I'd do whatever it took to make sure my mom came out of this okay. Even if it meant dealing with Miranda's attitude, her indifference, and that god-awful TikTok addiction. Family's family, right? Even when they drive you absolutely insane. Let me paint you a picture of Miranda. My wife could win an Olympic gold medal in pettiness, and I'm talking the kind of performance that would make the judges weep and give her a perfect 10 across the board. If there was a category for holding grudges, she'd have her own wing in the Hall of Fame, complete with a bronze statue and a plaque that read, "Never forgave, never forgot." This woman could remember a slight from 3 years ago with the clarity of a 4K television, but ask her where she put the car keys 5 minutes ago. Blank stare. Total amnesia. It was like her brain had a special filing system reserved exclusively for petty revenge and perceived injustices. The whole disaster started 6 years ago when Miranda and I were still in that honeymoon phase of dating where everything seems perfect and you're both pretending you don't have any annoying habits. I decided it was time for her to meet my mom, because that's what you do when you think you've found the one, right? You subject them to family scrutiny and pray everyone plays nice. Mom was actually excited, which should have been my first warning sign because Grace Thompson didn't get excited about much except Wheel of Fortune and 50% off sales at Target. She spent the entire morning baking her legendary apple pie, the one that had won 3 consecutive blue ribbons at the county fair and had people literally begging for the recipe like it was the nuclear launch codes. Miranda showed up wearing white jeans and a designer blouse that probably cost more than my monthly rent, carrying a bottle of wine that she pronounced in French even though we both knew she'd just Googled fancy wine 10 minutes earlier. Mom greeted her warmly, gave her the full house tour, and then served up the pie with vanilla ice cream while I sat there sweating like I was watching a bomb disposal in real time. Miranda took a bite, chewed slowly, made this face like she'd just discovered a hair in her food. And then, oh God, and then, she said it. "It's chewy." 2 words. That's all it took. 2 words to launch a family feud that would make the Hatfields and McCoys look like they were just having a minor disagreement. Mom's smile froze on her face like someone had hit pause on a DVD. I could actually see her soul leaving her body and returning with vengeance in its eyes. "Chewy," Mom repeated, her voice dangerously calm. "Apple pie isn't supposed to be chewy, sweetie. Perhaps you're more accustomed to store-bought?" The way she said store-bought made it sound like a war crime. Miranda just shrugged and said, "I guess I'm just used to different textures," which was basically code for, "Your cooking sucks, but I'm trying to be polite about it." From that moment on, it was over. Every family dinner became a battlefield. Every holiday was a strategic military operation. Mom would make passive-aggressive comments about how some people didn't appreciate homemade food. Miranda would counter with observations about how some people were stuck in the past and needed to embrace modern cuisine. I became the UN peacekeeping force, constantly negotiating treaties that lasted approximately 45 minutes before someone lobbed another verbal grenade. Christmas was particularly brutal. Mom got Miranda a cookbook titled Basics of Cooking for Beginners. Miranda got Mom a gift certificate for a spa day with a note that said, "You deserve to relax and let go of old grudges." I got stress-induced heartburn and a growing collection of Tums. My buddy Josh, the only person who witnessed this ongoing soap opera without being directly involved, once pulled me aside at a barbecue and said, "Dude, your wife and your mom are like two cats in a bag. Eventually, someone's gonna lose an eye." He wasn't wrong. Josh had known me since college, survived 4 years of my terrible decision-making, and was currently the only voice of reason in my life, which is terrifying when you consider his last major life choice was getting a tattoo of a hot dog on his shoulder because he lost a bet. I genuinely thought therapy might help. I suggested couples counseling to Miranda, thinking maybe a professional could help us navigate the mom situation. She looked at me like I'd suggested we join a cult. Therapy? For what? Because your mom can't handle that I have opinions? That's when I realized Miranda's therapy was sarcasm. She wielded it like a sword, sharp and precise, cutting through any attempt at serious conversation. When I suggested maybe she could try being nicer to Mom, she said, "Sure," right after she stops treating me like I'm the villain in her Hallmark movie. So when Mom's surgery date rolled around, I should have known it was going to be a disaster. Miranda approached it with all the enthusiasm of someone attending jury duty, which is to say, she showed up because legally she had to, but made sure everyone knew she didn't want to be there. She arrived at the hospital carrying a venti caramel latte with extra foam, her iPad tucked under her arm like she was about to sit through a boring work meeting, and wearing that expression on her face that could curdle milk from 3 rooms away. You know the look, slightly disgusted, definitely inconvenienced, and radiating an energy that screamed, "I have better places to be." Even the nurses picked up on it. I watched Nurse Hannah, a sweet woman who'd been nothing but kind to Mom, make eye contact with Miranda, immediately change direction, and find urgent business on the opposite side of the floor. The surgery itself took 4 hours, which felt like 4 years. I paced the waiting room so much I probably burned off a week's worth of calories. Miranda sat in the corner, scrolling through Instagram, occasionally looking up to ask if there was better Wi-Fi available. At one point, Josh showed up with coffee and sandwiches, took one look at Miranda, and whispered, "Is she aware that this is, like, a serious situation?" I just shrugged because what was I supposed to say? Yeah, but TikTok waits for no one. When Dr. Patel finally emerged from the operating room, still in his scrubs and looking exhausted, my heart stopped. He gave us a small smile, the kind that told you the news wasn't terrible, and said, "The operation went well. We were able to repair the valve and strengthen the surrounding tissue. She came through like a champ, but she's going to need monitoring for at least a week, possibly longer. The next few days are critical." I felt this wave of relief wash over me, so powerful I actually had to sit down before my knees gave out. Mom made it. She was alive. She was going to be okay. I looked over at Miranda, expecting to see some kind of emotion, relief, happiness. Hell, I would have settled for mild interest. Instead, I saw her roll her eyes and heard her mutter under her breath, "Guess I'm married to a hospital bed now." She said it quietly, but not quietly enough. Josh heard it. I heard it. I'm pretty sure the elderly couple waiting for news about their son heard it. That should have been the moment. Right there, that exact second, when I realized something dark was brewing behind those perfectly applied acrylic lashes and that Instagram-ready smile. That should have been when I understood that my wife's hatred for my mother ran deeper than petty arguments over pie and different parenting philosophies. But I didn't see it. I was too relieved, too exhausted, too focused on the fact that my mom had survived. I told myself Miranda was just tired, stressed, uncomfortable with hospitals like she'd said. I made excuses because that's what you do when you love someone. You give them the benefit of the doubt, even when that doubt is waving red flags the size of Texas. Looking back now, knowing everything that happened next, I can see that moment so clearly. It's frozen in my memory like a photograph, a warning I ignored because I wanted to believe my wife was better than her worst impulses. Turns out, I was wrong. Dead wrong. Almost literally. Mom bounced back from heart surgery like she was auditioning for a medical miracle documentary. I'm talking full-on comeback tour, the kind of recovery that had doctors shaking their heads in disbelief and muttering things like remarkable and unprecedented while checking her charts for the third time. Within 48 hours, she was sitting up in bed, complaining about the hospital food with the passion of a Food Network critic and asking when she could go home because the mattress was lumpier than oatmeal. The woman had just had her chest cracked open and her heart literally repaired, and she was worried about thread count. That's Grace Thompson for you. Priorities that would make absolutely no sense to normal people, but were perfectly logical in her world. The machines surrounding her bed beeped and hummed like a symphony of baby birds, each one a tiny promise that she was still here, still fighting, still very much alive. There was the heart monitor with its steady rhythm, the oxygen sensor clipped to her finger, the 4-drip feeding her fluids and medication, and at least 3 other devices I couldn't identify but assumed were important because they had lots of numbers and graphs. Every alarm, every beep, every digital chirp was music to my ears because it meant her heart was beating, her lungs were working, and I hadn't lost her. I spent so much time staring at those monitors that I started dreaming in EKG patterns. Miranda, on the other hand, visited exactly twice during Mom's entire hospital stay, and both times she acted like she deserved a Nobel Peace Prize for showing up. The first visit happened on day 3, and she swept into the room like she was making a grand entrance at a charity gala, carrying a bouquet of flowers that looked suspiciously perfect. Too perfect, because they were plastic. Not even good plastic. We're talking dollar store quality, the kind that screamed, "I stopped at a gas station on the way here." When I pointed this out, Miranda looked at me like I'd just insulted her ancestors and said, "They last longer. Real flowers die, Max. These are practical." Practical. My mother had just survived heart surgery, and my wife brought her plastic flowers because they were practical. Mom looked at those flowers, looked at Miranda, and said with a smile that could have cut glass, "How thoughtful. Just like the real thing. Except without any of the effort or beauty." I watched Miranda's jaw tighten, saw that little vein in her temple start to throb, and knew we were approximately 30 seconds away from an incident. I quickly changed the subject to something neutral like hospital food, but the damage was done. Miranda stayed for exactly 17 minutes. Yes, I counted, before claiming she had a very important work call and disappearing faster than my paycheck on rent day. The second visit was somehow worse. Miranda showed up with a fruit basket that looked like it had been attacked by a bear. Half the grapes were missing, and there was a gift card to Olive Garden tucked inside like an afterthought. "For when you get out," she said to Mom, her smile so fake it could have been CGI. Mom, who was now fully in her element and feeling stronger, just nodded and said, "How generous. I'll be sure to think of you while I'm eating unlimited breadsticks." The sarcasm was so thick you could have spread it on toast. Miranda pretended not to notice, but I saw her grip her purse a little tighter, her knuckles going white. What really killed Miranda, and I mean absolutely destroyed her ego, was how much the hospital staff adored my mom. The nurses loved her. The orderlies loved her. Even the grumpy janitor who never smiled at anyone stopped by her room to chat. They started calling her the comedian of Ward 3 because she had everyone in stitches despite barely being able to sit up without assistance. Nurse Hannah would come in to check vitals and leave 10 minutes later wiping tears from her eyes because Mom had told some story about the time she accidentally dyed her hair green trying to save money on a salon visit. Dr. Patel, who I'd initially thought was all business and no personality, would linger during his rounds just to hear what Mom had to say. One afternoon, I walked in to find Mom holding court with 3 nurses, 2 physical therapists, and a medical student who looked like he'd stumbled into the world's most entertaining TED Talk. She was in the middle of describing her ongoing battle with the neighborhood squirrels who kept raiding her bird feeder, complete with hand gestures and sound effects, and everyone was losing it. "So I'm standing there," Mom said, barely able to keep a straight face herself, wearing my bathrobe and holding a super soaker, yelling at this squirrel like we're in a Western standoff. My neighbor probably thought I'd lost my mind. The nurses were cackling. Even the medical student, who looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days, was grinning ear to ear. Miranda witnessed this scene during her second visit, and I swear I could see something dark flash across her face. It wasn't just annoyance or frustration, it was pure, undiluted jealousy. My wife, who spent half her life curating the perfect Instagram feed and crafting witty tweets for maximum engagement, couldn't stand that my 65-year-old mother in a hospital gown was getting more attention than her. She stood in the doorway, watching this display of genuine human connection and warmth, and I could practically hear her internal monologue screaming, "Why doesn't anyone think I'm this interesting?" Josh picked up on it immediately. My best friend had stopped by with magazines and contraband snacks, because hospital food is basically a war crime. When Miranda made her grand exit after visit number 2, he watched her leave, turned to me, and said in a low voice, "Dude, your wife looks like she's planning a coup. I'm talking full-on hostile takeover, Game of Thrones level scheming." I laughed because that's what you do when your best friend makes a ridiculous observation, but the laugh felt hollow even to me. Josh wasn't usually wrong about people. The man had a sixth sense for drama, probably from growing up with 4 sisters who treated every family dinner like an episode of Survivor. "You're being paranoid," I told him, but even as I said it, I wasn't entirely convinced. There was something in the way Miranda looked at my mom, something in the tightness of her smile and the coldness of her eyes that made me uncomfortable. But I pushed it down, buried it under layers of denial and optimism, because acknowledging it meant acknowledging that maybe my marriage wasn't as solid as I'd convinced myself it was. The rest of that week passed in a blur of medical updates, physical therapy sessions, and small victories. Mom graduated from bed to chair, then from chair to walking short distances with a walker, which she hated with a burning passion and insisted made her look like a broken shopping cart. The doctors were thrilled with her progress. Dr. Patel said she was recovering faster than most patients half her age, which made Mom puff up with pride like she'd just won an award. "Good genes and stubbornness," she told him. "That's the secret." Miranda's visits became even less frequent. She'd text me excuses. Work was busy. She had a migraine. Traffic was terrible. Her horoscope said it wasn't a good day for hospital visits. That last one might have been a joke, but honestly, with Miranda, it was hard to tell. I stopped asking her to come, stopped expecting her to show up, and started accepting that I was basically doing this alone. Josh filled in the gaps, bringing coffee and moral support, making Mom laugh with stories about his disastrous attempts at online dating. "I'm matched with someone who turned out to be my cousin," he told her one afternoon, and Mom laughed so hard she triggered one of the monitors, sending a nurse running in to check on her. Looking back now, I can see all the warning signs lined up like dominoes, just waiting for someone to knock over the first one. Miranda's increasing absence, her barely concealed resentment, the way she looked at those machines like they were personal enemies. But in the moment, I was too focused on Mom's recovery, too relieved that she was getting better, too exhausted from sleeping in uncomfortable hospital chairs and living off vending machine food. I didn't see the storm brewing. I didn't realize that my wife's jealousy and pettiness were about to escalate into something dangerous, something that would almost cost my mother her life and would definitely cost Miranda her freedom. I was just trying to get through each day, watching those monitors beep their reassuring rhythm, completely oblivious to the fact that those same machines would soon become weapons in a battle I didn't even know we were fighting. Room 304 became a war zone, and I'm not talking about the fun kind of war where you throw water balloons and everyone laughs afterward. This was psychological warfare, the kind that would make CIA interrogators take notes and nod with professional respect. Every single visit turned into a carefully choreographed dance of passive aggression, fake smiles, and comments so loaded with subtext they could have sunk the Titanic. Mom would be lying there, hooked up to her army of beeping machines, looking innocent as a lamb, while Miranda would walk in radiating the kind of energy that made plants wilt and small children cry. I was stuck in the middle, playing referee in a match where both players were fighting dirty and the rulebook had been thrown out the window somewhere around the second day. It always started the same way. Miranda would enter the room with her phone in one hand and her overpriced latte in the other, wearing an outfit that screamed, "I have better places to be, but I'm making an appearance for the sake of my marriage." Mom would look up from whatever magazine Nurse Hannah had brought her, usually something about gardening or home renovation, and the temperature in the room would drop about 15 degrees. You could have aged beef in there. Miranda, Mom would say, her voice dripping with the kind of sweetness that tasted like artificial sweetener. How nice of you to stop by. I know how busy you must be with all your activities. The way she said activities made it sound like Miranda spent her days robbing banks or running an underground fighting ring. Miranda would smile that smile, the one that didn't reach her eyes and looked like it physically hurt to maintain. Grace, you look so much better today. Almost like a real person. Oh yeah, she went there. She actually said that to a woman recovering from major heart surgery. I jumped in before Mom could respond with something that would require security, redirecting the conversation to something safe like hospital food or the weather or literally anything else that wouldn't result in bloodshed. But the real entertainment came when Mom would make requests. She had this gift for asking for things that she knew would irritate Miranda, like she'd spent her entire recovery planning psychological operations. Miranda, did you bring my reading glasses? Mom asked one afternoon, her voice innocent as a Disney princess. The ones in the green case? I mentioned them yesterday. Miranda's eye twitched, just slightly, but I caught it. And she responded with that customer service voice people use when they're imagining violence but can't act on it. Oh, I forgot. But I did bring your favorite TV remote from home. She held up the remote with a flourish, like she'd just solved world hunger. The problem? There was no TV in the hospital room. The remote was completely useless, about as helpful as a screen door on a submarine. Mom stared at it, then at Miranda, then back at the remote. How thoughtful, she said slowly. I'll be sure to use this to change the channel on my imagination. I had to leave the room and laugh into my hands in the hallway because it was either that or scream. Josh found me out there losing it and just shook his head. Your family is a sitcom, dude. Like an actual sitcom. I'm talking primetime television gold. The nurses started to notice the tension too. Nurse Hannah, bless her heart, tried to maintain professionalism, but even she couldn't hide the look she'd give when Miranda showed up. Once, I caught her physically steering another nurse away from the room when Miranda was visiting, whispering something that made the other nurse's eyes go wide. The hospital staff had basically formed a protective barrier around my mom, treating her like she was their favorite patient, which she was, and treating Miranda like she was a potential biohazard that needed to be handled with extreme caution. The situation reached peak absurdity when Dr. Patel pulled me aside one afternoon. He had that look doctors get when they're about to tell you something uncomfortable but necessary, like when they're about to recommend a colonoscopy or inform you that your insurance doesn't cover anything useful. We stepped into a small consultation room, and he closed the door with the kind of care that told me this was serious. Mr. Thompson, he started, adjusting his glasses in that way people do when they're buying time to figure out how to phrase something delicate. I need to ask you something about your wife. My stomach immediately dropped into my shoes. Nothing good ever started with, I need to ask you something about your wife. That's universal code for your spouse is doing something weird and we're concerned. Dr. Patel continued. She's been asking the nurses a lot of questions about the machines. Very specific questions about how they work, what triggers the alarms, what happens if they malfunction. At first, we thought she was just curious, trying to understand her mother-in-law's care. But he trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. But what? I asked, though part of me didn't want to know the answer. But the questions are getting more technical. She wanted to know about alarm protocols, response times, whether the machines can be silenced, how long it takes for staff to notice if something goes wrong. He paused, studying my face. Is your wife a medical professional? Does she work in healthcare? I actually laughed, which probably wasn't the appropriate response, but the idea of Miranda working in healthcare was so absurd it bordered on comedy. She works in marketing, I said. Social media marketing. The closest she gets to medical care is posting about her vitamin supplements on Instagram. Dr. Patel nodded slowly, and I swear I saw something click in his expression, like a puzzle piece sliding into place. Ah, he said, in that tone that meant, that explains absolutely everything and also nothing at all. He didn't elaborate, but I could read between the lines. He thought Miranda was weird, possibly concerning, and definitely someone to keep an eye on. Join the club, document. The membership fees are paid in stress and confusion. Things got worse at home. Miranda had stopped even pretending to care about Mom's recovery. She'd come home from her brief hospital visits and immediately launch into complaints like she'd just returned from war. Your mother treated me like an outsider again, she'd say. pouring herself a glass of wine that was definitely more than the recommended serving size. She acts like I'm the enemy. She's in recovery, Miranda. I'd respond, trying to keep my voice level even though I wanted to scream. She just had major surgery. She's not on a reality show. She's not performing for cameras. She's literally fighting to stay alive. Miranda would roll her eyes so hard I worried they'd get stuck that way. Maybe if she wasn't so dramatic, she wouldn't need all those beeping machines. She said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather or discussing what to have for dinner. At the time, I thought she was just being sarcastic, venting her frustration in that sharp-tongued way she had. I didn't realize she meant it literally. I didn't understand that she was actually bothered by the machines themselves, that she saw them as obstacles rather than lifelines. Josh came over one night and found me stress-eating leftover pizza while staring blankly at the TV. He took one look at me and said, "You look like someone who just realized their life is a dumpster fire, but is too polite to call the fire department." He wasn't wrong. I told him about the weird questions, the hospital visits that felt more like hostage situations, the growing sense that something was fundamentally broken in my marriage. "Dude," Josh said, sitting down next to me and stealing a slice of pizza, "I've been trying to tell you. Your wife is not okay with this situation. She's not just annoyed or uncomfortable. She's actively hostile. I've seen people at the DMV with better attitudes." He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, and added, "You need to watch her around your mom." I'm serious. Something's not right. I brushed him off because that's what I did best. Ignored problems until they exploded in my face. "She's just stressed," I said, repeating the excuse I'd been telling myself for weeks. "Work is crazy. This whole hospital thing is overwhelming, and she and mom have never gotten along. It'll get better once mom comes home and things settle down." Josh gave me this look, the kind of look that said, "You're an idiot and I love you, but you're still an idiot," and changed the subject. But his words stuck with me, bouncing around my brain like a pinball every time I visited the hospital and saw Miranda's face when those machines beeped. Every time she flinched at an alarm or asked another question about protocols. Every time she looked at my mom with something that went beyond dislike and ventured into territory I didn't want to acknowledge. The beeping continued, steady and reassuring, a metronome counting down the days until mom could go home. The machines kept her alive, kept her stable, gave us all peace of mind. Or at least, they gave me peace of mind. For Miranda, those machines were something else entirely, something that stood between her and whatever dark thought had taken root in her mind. I just didn't know it yet. I was too busy playing peacekeeper, too exhausted from hospital visits and family drama, too invested in believing my wife was capable of basic human decency. Turns out, I was wrong about a lot of things. And that mistake almost cost my mother everything. Tuesday, that's the day that changed everything. Not Monday, which would have been poetic in a case of the Mondays kind of way, and not Friday, which at least would have had the decency to ruin my weekend. No, it was a Tuesday, the most boring, middle of the week, nothing special kind of day, the kind of day when you least expect your entire world to explode like a piñata filled with trauma and regret. If I'd known what was coming, I would have just stayed in bed and let the universe handle its chaos without my participation. Mom was doing great. Like, legitimately, no sarcasm needed great. Dr. Patel had done his evening rounds and given us the kind of update that makes you want to hug strangers and tip your waitress extra. "Her vitals are excellent," he'd said, checking her chart with the satisfaction of a mechanic who'd just fixed a classic car. "Heart rate is steady. Oxygen levels are perfect, and she's responding to medication beautifully. Just keep an eye on her tonight. But honestly, she's in the best shape she's been in since the surgery." He gave me a reassuring pat on the shoulder, the kind that said, "You can relax now," and headed off to deal with whatever other medical dramas were unfolding in other rooms. I'd been at the hospital for basically 14 hours straight, surviving on vending machine coffee that tasted like it had been brewed through an old sock and whatever sad sandwiches the cafeteria was passing off as food. My back hurt from the torture device they called a visitor's chair, my eyes felt like they'd been sandpapered, and I was pretty sure I'd developed a permanent hunch from leaning over to check monitors every 5 minutes. I needed a break. Just a quick one. 20 minutes to stretch my legs, get some real coffee from the decent place down the street, and remember what fresh air felt like. Miranda had shown up around 7 that evening. which was surprising enough that I almost checked the calendar to make sure I hadn't entered an alternate dimension. She walked in wearing yoga pants and an oversized hoodie, which for her was basically the equivalent of showing up in pajamas, a clear sign she hadn't bothered to try. "I was in the neighborhood," she said, which was obviously a lie because we lived nowhere near the hospital, and she had no reason to be in this part of town unless she was intentionally coming to visit. But I wasn't about to look a gift horse in the mouth. She was here, and that meant I could take a break without abandoning my mom completely. "I need to run down the street and grab a real coffee," I told her, already pulling on my jacket because if I didn't leave immediately, I might actually collapse from exhaustion. 20 minutes, tops. Just sit with her, okay? She's stable, the monitors are all good, and the nurses are right outside if anything happens. You literally just have to exist in this room for 20 minutes. Miranda looked at me like I'd just asked her to perform open-heart surgery herself. She sighed, this deep, dramatic sigh that suggested I was asking her to climb Mount Everest barefoot while carrying a refrigerator. "Fine," she said, dropping into the chair I'd been occupying and immediately pulling out her phone. "But if she starts another monologue about you being her favorite child, I'm unplugging myself." She laughed at her own joke, and I chuckled too, because it was funny in that dark humor way Miranda specialized in. Oh, the irony. Oh, the absolutely devastating, soul-crushing irony of that statement. If only I'd known she meant it way more literally than I could have possibly imagined. I left. I actually left my mother alone with Miranda, trusting that my wife could handle sitting in a chair and breathing for 20 minutes without causing an international incident. The coffee shop was a 5-minute walk, and I took my time getting there, enjoying the cool evening air and the feeling of being outside fluorescent-lit hospital walls. I ordered a large dark roast, added way too much sugar because I'd earned it, and stood outside for a minute just savoring the taste of coffee that didn't come from a vending machine that probably hadn't been cleaned since the Clinton administration. 15 minutes. That's how long I was gone. 15 minutes of peace, of normalcy, of pretending my life wasn't a complicated mess of family drama and medical emergencies. I was walking back, coffee in hand, thinking about how Mom would probably be discharged in a few days and we could start getting back to whatever passed for normal in the Thompson family, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer it because unknown numbers are usually either telemarketers or that car warranty scam that won't leave anyone alone, but something made me pick up. Call it instinct, call it paranoia, call it whatever you want. I answered. "Mr. Thompson?" The voice was urgent, professional, and immediately sent every alarm bell in my body ringing like a fire station at full alert. "This is Nurse Hannah. We need you back immediately. It's your mother." I don't remember running. I don't remember dropping my coffee or nearly getting hit by a car crossing the street or bursting through the hospital doors like I was auditioning for an action movie. My brain just skipped all of that and jumped straight to me standing in the doorway of room 304, my lungs burning and my heart trying to escape through my throat, staring at a scene that would haunt my nightmares for months afterward. Mom was flatlined. The heart monitor that had been beeping its steady, reassuring rhythm for days was now showing a flat line. That terrible, awful, soul-destroying flat line that you see in movies and never think you'll see in real life. The machines that had been singing their chorus of beeps and hums were silent. Too silent. The kind of silence that screams louder than any alarm ever could. Nurses were everywhere, moving with controlled chaos, shouting medical terminology I didn't understand. Someone was doing chest compressions on my mother, pushing down on her chest with rhythmic force while another nurse prepared a defibrillator. "Clear," someone shouted, and my mom's body jerked with the shock of electricity, and the line stayed flat. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't do anything except stand there watching them fight to bring my mother back from whatever edge she'd fallen off. This wasn't supposed to happen. Dr. Patel had said she was stable. He'd said she was doing great. He'd said all I had to do was keep an eye on her, and I'd left, and now she was dying, and I couldn't process any of it. My brain had basically blue-screened, showing nothing but static and error messages. Then I saw it. Through the chaos of nurses and equipment and desperate medical intervention, I saw something on the floor near the side of the bed. A cable, just lying there, disconnected, like someone had casually unplugged a lamp. Why isn't the alarm ringing? Dr. Patel's voice cut through the chaos as he rushed into the room, immediately taking charge of the situation. The cardiac alarm should have alerted us immediately. It's been disconnected. Nurse Hannah shouted back, her hands moving quickly to reconnect wires and check other equipment. The monitoring system wasn't transmitting to the nursing station. Disconnected. The word hit me like a freight train loaded with bricks and bad news. I turned, my body moving on autopilot, my eyes searching the room until they landed on Miranda. She was still sitting in the chair, pressed back against the wall now, her phone clutched in her hands, her eyes wide like she'd just witnessed something unexpected. Not guilty, not panicked, just surprised, like she'd been watching a TV show and hadn't expected that plot twist. "What did you do?" My voice came out strangled, barely recognizable as my own. "Miranda, what did you do?" She blinked at me, confusion crossing her face like she genuinely didn't understand why I was upset. "What?" "Nothing. I was just sitting here." The alarm was disconnected. I was yelling now, not caring who heard me or what kind of scene I was making. The alarm that keeps her alive was disconnected. How did that happen? Miranda stood up, defensive now, her jaw setting in that stubborn way it did when she felt attacked. "It was making too much noise, okay? It kept beeping and beeping, and I have anxiety, Max. You know I have anxiety. I just pressed a button to make it stop. It was driving me crazy." The room spun. The world tilted on its axis. She pressed a button. She silenced the alarm that was supposed to alert the nurses if something went wrong. She disconnected my mother's lifeline because it was annoying her. "You silenced her lifeline." I screamed, and I didn't care that doctors and nurses were staring, didn't care that I was probably violating about 17 hospital policies. That alarm saves her life. That's the whole point. Relax, Max. Miranda actually had the audacity to sound annoyed with me, like I was overreacting. She was fine when I did it. "Those beeps give me anxiety. I didn't think it would matter. How was I supposed to know something would go wrong in the 15 minutes you were gone?" "Oh, sure. Sure." My mother was currently being shocked back to life like Frankenstein's monster, but at least Miranda's stress levels had been managed. At least her precious anxiety hadn't been triggered by the sound of medical equipment doing its job. At least she'd been comfortable while my mom died alone in a hospital room. The nurses were still working, still fighting, and I stood there staring at my wife, really seeing her for the first time, and realizing I'd married someone I didn't know at all. Time does this weird thing when you're watching people try to restart your mother's heart. It stretches and compresses like a broken accordion, where seconds feel like hours and hours feel like seconds, and your brain can't figure out which dimension of reality it's supposed to be processing. I watched Dr. Patel and his team work on Mom with the kind of controlled urgency you see in war movies. Everyone moving with purpose, calling out numbers and medication names like they were reciting some kind of medical incantation that would bring her back from wherever she'd gone. Another shock from the defibrillator. Her body jerked again, arching off the bed like she was possessed, and still the line stayed flat. That horrible, monotone beep of nothing, of absence, of game over. My legs gave out, and I hit the wall, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor with my knees pulled up to my chest, watching through the forest of moving bodies and medical equipment. Nurse Hannah was counting compressions, her voice steady despite the sweat on her forehead. 1, 2, 3, 4. Someone else was squeezing an oxygen bag attached to a mask over Mom's face. Dr. Patel was calling for epinephrine, his hands already reaching for the syringe a nurse was preparing. This was really happening. This wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from or a bad daydream I could snap out of. My mother was actually dying, and it was because my wife couldn't handle the sound of a beeping machine. I looked at Miranda again, still standing there against the opposite wall, and something inside me just snapped. Not like a twig breaking. More like a dam bursting, all the frustration and denial and forced optimism from the past week exploding outward in one catastrophic flood. "You killed her," I said, my voice low and dangerous in a way I didn't recognize. "You actually killed her because a beeping noise annoyed you." "She's not dead," Miranda shot back, but her voice wavered, and I could see her starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, she'd screwed up on a cosmic level. "They're working on her. She's going to be fine. You're being dramatic." Dramatic? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I literally could not process the words coming out of her mouth. "My mother is getting CPR because you unplugged the one thing keeping her monitored. There's nothing dramatic about this. This is real. This is actually happening." Dr. Patel shouted something I didn't catch, and suddenly the flat line jumped. A blip, then another, then the most beautiful sound I've ever heard in my entire life. That steady beep of a heartbeat. Irregular at first, stuttering like an old engine trying to start, but there. She was there. The team didn't celebrate, didn't high-five or congratulate each other. They just kept working, stabilizing her, checking vitals, adjusting medication, making sure that heartbeat stayed. Professional to the core, even while my entire soul was doing backflips of relief so intense I thought I might throw up. "We've got sinus rhythm," someone announced, and Dr. Patel nodded, his shoulders relaxing just slightly. "Keep monitoring. I want a full cardiac panel stat, and someone get security to pull the footage from this room. I want to know exactly what happened here." He looked at me, his expression a mixture of relief and something else. Anger, maybe, or suspicion. "Your mother's stable for now, but this should never have happened. The alarm system is designed to be tamper-proof for exactly this reason." Nurse Hannah, who'd been nothing but sweet and kind the entire week, looked at Miranda with an expression that could have frozen hell. "The alarm didn't just disconnect itself," she said, her voice cold. "Someone manually disabled it. The system logs will show when and how." She moved to check the equipment, running her hands over cables and buttons with the expertise of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for. When she found it, she held up a small connector, dangling from her fingers like evidence at a crime scene. This was deliberately unplugged. You have to physically pull it out. It doesn't just fall. Miranda's face went pale, that Instagram filter-perfect complexion suddenly looking waxwork and artificial under the harsh hospital lights. I didn't know," she stammered, and I could see her trying to construct a defense in real time, her brain working overtime to find an explanation that would make this okay. There were so many wires and buttons. I thought I was just turning down the volume. How was I supposed to know which one was important? "They're all labeled," Nurse Hannah said flatly, pointing to the clear labels on every piece of equipment. "Every single connection is marked. And there are warning signs everywhere about not tampering with medical devices. You literally cannot miss them unless you're trying to." The contempt in her voice was so thick you could have used it as mortar. I'd never heard this woman say anything negative about anyone, and now she was looking at my wife like she was something scraped off the bottom of a shoe. Security showed up then, two guys in uniforms who looked like they dealt with this kind of drama on a daily basis and were thoroughly unimpressed by all of it. Dr. Patel pulled them aside and spoke in low tones, occasionally gesturing toward the equipment and then toward Miranda. I watched one of them take notes while the other kept glancing at my wife with the kind of expression that suggested he'd already formed an opinion and it wasn't favorable. They'd want statements, probably. They'd review footage. They'd figure out exactly what happened in this room during those 15 minutes I was gone, getting coffee and thinking everything was fine. Mom started to come around, her eyelids fluttering like butterfly wings. She looked confused, disoriented, scared in a way I'd never seen her before. My tough-as-nails mother who'd fought off raccoons and raised me as a single parent and survived heart surgery looked absolutely terrified, and that broke something in me that I don't think ever fully healed. I pushed past the nurses and grabbed her hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm here, Mom. You're okay. You're going to be okay." She tried to speak, but couldn't, her throat probably raw from the intubation. Her eyes found mine, and I saw the question there. What happened? I didn't know how to answer that. How do you tell your mother that your wife almost killed her because medical equipment was inconvenient? How do you explain that level of selfishness and disregard for human life? I just squeezed her hand tighter and tried to smile, tried to be strong for her even though I was falling apart inside. The security guards approached Miranda, and I saw her straighten up, putting on that customer service smile she used when she wanted something. "Officers, this is all a huge misunderstanding," she started, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I was just trying to make the room more comfortable. I didn't realize." "Ma'am, we're going to need you to come with us," one of them interrupted, clearly not interested in her explanation. "There's going to be an investigation into this incident, and we need your statement." It wasn't a request. Miranda looked at me, expecting me to jump to her defense like I always did, expecting me to smooth things over and make excuses and tell everyone she didn't mean it. But I just stared at her, my hand still holding my mother's, and said nothing. "Max," she said, her voice taking on that whiny quality that usually made me cave. Tell them I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Tell them it was an accident. Still, I said nothing. I had no words left for her, no energy to spend defending the indefensible. She'd crossed a line so far over that I couldn't even see it anymore in the rearview mirror. Max, her voice was sharper now, desperate. You're my husband. Say something. Get out. I finally said, my voice quiet but filled with every ounce of rage and betrayal I was feeling. Get out of this room. Get out of this hospital. And honestly, get out of my life. I'm done. Her mouth dropped open in shock, like she genuinely couldn't believe I was choosing my almost dead mother over her. You can't be serious. I made a mistake. People make mistakes. Mistakes are forgetting to buy milk, I said, my voice getting louder despite my best efforts to stay calm. Mistakes are missing an anniversary. Disconnecting someone's cardiac monitor because the beeping annoys you isn't a mistake. It's attempted murder. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Murder. I'd said it. The thing we were all thinking, but no one wanted to vocalize because it sounded too dramatic, too extreme, too much like something that happened to other people in TV shows and true crime podcasts. Dr. Patel cleared his throat, and I realized the entire room had gone silent. Everyone staring at this domestic drama unfolding in the middle of their emergency. Security, please escort Mrs. Thompson out. We need to focus on our patient. The guards moved in, not touching Miranda, but making it very clear she needed to leave. She grabbed her purse, shot me a look that was equal parts betrayal and fury, and walked out with her head held high, still trying to maintain dignity in a situation where dignity had left the building approximately 20 minutes ago. The room slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Nurses adjusted equipment, checked monitors, made notes on charts. Dr. Patel examined Mom thoroughly, shining lights in her eyes, checking reflexes, asking her to squeeze his hands. You gave us quite a scare, Mrs. Thompson, he said gently. But you're a fighter. We've got you stabilized now, and we're going to monitor you very closely. This won't happen again. Mom managed a weak smile, squeezed my hand back, and I felt tears streaming down my face that I didn't remember starting to cry. Relief, rage, exhaustion, betrayal. Every emotion I'd been bottling up for the past week came pouring out all at once, and I just sat there holding my mother's hand and crying like I was 5 years old again. Nurse Hannah brought me tissues and a glass of water, patted my shoulder with maternal kindness, and whispered, "She's going to be okay. We've got her." But I knew, we all knew, that things were far from okay. My mother had almost died because my wife valued her own comfort over someone else's life. And as I sat there watching those monitors beep their steady, precious rhythm, I realized my marriage was over, my trust was shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. The hospital treated the incident like a crime scene from CSI, except instead of dramatic lighting and rock music, we got fluorescent bulbs and the constant hum of medical equipment. Within hours, there were people in suits crawling all over room 304, taking photographs, dusting for fingerprints like Miranda might have left evidence of premeditation on the heart monitor, and generally making everyone uncomfortable with their presence. Hospital administration was in full damage control mode, which I understood because patient almost dies due to visitor tampering with equipment is probably not the kind of publicity that brings in positive Yelp reviews. Mom was stable, thank whatever deity was on duty that night, but they'd moved her to the ICU as a precaution, hooking her up to even more monitors than before and stationing a nurse directly outside her room at all times. No more visitors except immediate family, and even I had to show ID and get a special badge that made me look like I was attending the world's most depressing convention. Dr. Patel had essentially locked down the entire situation, and honestly, I was grateful. If Miranda tried to come back, she'd have to get through security, 3 locked doors, and probably a few nurses who looked ready to commit violence on my mother's behalf. The real investigation started the next morning. I'd spent the night in an actual chair this time. The ICU had slightly better furniture, probably because they knew people would be camping out for extended periods, and was running on approximately 0 hours of sleep and too much coffee when Detective Sarah Morrison showed up. She was exactly what you'd picture when you think detective. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, carrying a folder that probably contained my entire life story and definitely contained evidence that was about to ruin Miranda's. She introduced herself with a firm handshake and got right to business. which I appreciated because I was too exhausted for small talk. Mr. Thompson, I need to ask you some questions about last night's incident, she said, pulling up a chair and flipping open her notebook. Walk me through everything that happened from the moment you decided to leave the room. So I did. I told her about being exhausted, needing coffee, trusting my wife for 20 minutes, the phone call from Nurse Hannah, running back to find chaos. She took notes, asked clarifying questions, and maintained this neutral expression that gave nothing away. When I finished, she nodded and said, "We've pulled the security footage. Would you like to see it?" I wasn't sure I did, but I also knew I needed to. I needed to see exactly what happened in that room. Needed to understand how my wife could do something so unthinkably reckless. We moved to a small office where they had the footage queued up on a computer screen. Detective Morrison hit play, and I watched my own life turn into a true crime documentary. The timestamp showed 7:18 p.m., 2 minutes after I'd left. Miranda was sitting in the chair, scrolling through her phone with the kind of intense focus most people reserve for actually important tasks. Mom was asleep. The monitors were beeping their normal rhythm. Everything looked peaceful and safe. At 7:19, one of the monitors beeped slightly louder, probably a routine alarm. Nothing serious, the kind of thing that happened a dozen times a day and required no intervention. Miranda looked up, annoyed, staring at the offending machine like it had personally insulted her. Then, at 7:19 and 32 seconds, she stood up. She actually put down her phone, walked over to the side of the bed, and leaned behind the monitors. The camera angle wasn't perfect, but you could see her hands moving, see her examining the connections, see her deliberately reach for something. At 7:20 exactly, the alarm indicator on the nursing station monitor went dark. She disconnected the transmission cable, the one that sent alerts to the nurses when something went wrong. Miranda stood there for a second, checking to make sure the beeping had stopped from her end, then nodded with satisfaction and sat back down. She picked up her phone and went back to scrolling. Just scrolling, like she hadn't just severed the only lifeline between my mother and the people who could save her. The footage continued, showing Miranda occasionally glancing up at Mom, then back to her phone, completely oblivious or completely indifferent. I couldn't tell which was worse. At 7:39 p.m., Mom's body tensed. You could see it even on the grainy footage, the way her muscles contracted, the way something went wrong. Miranda didn't notice for almost 30 seconds because she was too busy on her phone. When she finally looked up and saw Mom's condition deteriorating, she didn't hit the call button. She didn't run for help. She just stood up, walked closer to the bed with this expression of confusion, like she couldn't quite figure out what was happening. It was Nurse Hannah doing routine rounds who discovered the situation, who saw the disconnected cable and Mom's failing vitals and immediately called the code that saved her life. If Hannah had been even 2 minutes later on her rounds, my mother would be dead. I watched the entire thing twice, and each viewing made me feel sicker. Detective Morrison paused the footage and pulled out another piece of evidence, Miranda's phone records. "We obtained a warrant for her cell phone," she explained, sliding a printed document across the desk. "Based on the severity of the incident and the suspicious nature of her actions. Here's what we found." I read through the search history, and my blood turned to ice water. The searches started 3 days before the incident, progressive and deliberate, like someone researching how to commit a crime without getting caught. How to stop hospital monitor beeping was the first one, innocent enough on its surface. Then, can you silence medical alarms without nurses noticing, and hospital alarm system how it works, and what happens if cardiac monitor disconnected. Each search was more specific, more damning, more evidence that this wasn't just some impulsive moment of annoyance. The last search, conducted at 6:47 p.m. on Tuesday, 30 minutes before I left for coffee, was how long before patient reacts if alarm off. She'd literally researched how long it would take for something bad to happen if she disabled the alarm. My wife had Googled how to commit a felony with hospital equipment and thought she'd get away with it because, why? Because she was smarter than everyone else? Because she didn't think anyone would check? Because she genuinely believed her comfort mattered more than someone's life? "This is premeditated," Detective Morrison said, stating the obvious but needing to say it out loud for the record. She didn't just impulsively press a button. She researched it, planned it, waited for an opportunity, and executed it. That moves this beyond reckless endangerment into much more serious territory. I felt like I was going to throw up. This wasn't the woman I married. Or maybe it was, and I'd just been too blind or too stupid or too desperate to believe and love to see it. What happens now? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. We're building a case, she said. The DA's office is reviewing everything, and they'll decide what charges to file. Given the evidence, the footage, the search history, the witness statements from hospital staff, I'd say she's looking at reckless endangerment at minimum, possibly attempted manslaughter if the DA wants to push it. She deliberately disabled life-saving equipment after researching the consequences. That's not an accident. Josh showed up around noon with food I couldn't eat and support I desperately needed. I showed him the footage, the search history, everything. He watched in silence, his expression getting darker with each piece of evidence. When I finished, he just sat there for a long moment before saying, "Dude, your wife is actually insane. Like, clinically, certifiably, belongs in a padded room insane. Who does this? Who literally Googles how to kill someone and then tries it?" She didn't try to kill her, I said automatically, then realized how stupid that sounded given the evidence literally displayed on the screen in front of us. "Max," Josh said, turning to look at me with the kind of serious expression he usually reserved for discussing sports or complaining about his dating life. "She researched how to disconnect life-saving equipment, waited until you were gone, disconnected that equipment, and then sat there scrolling TikTok while your mom died. If that nurse hadn't come in for rounds, your mom would be dead, and Miranda would be sitting at home posting about her day like nothing happened. Stop making excuses for her." He was right. Of course he was right. Josh had been right about Miranda from the beginning. From that first barbecue when he'd pulled me aside and said something felt off. I'd ignored him, dismissed his concerns as paranoia, chosen to believe in the fairy tale instead of seeing the red flags that were apparently visible from space. "I married a monster," I said, and saying it out loud made it real in a way that thinking it hadn't. "Yeah," Josh agreed, "but at least you're divorcing one. That's got to count for something." The hospital's legal team got involved next because apparently this incident had opened up a whole can of liability worms. They wanted statements, documentation, assurances that I wasn't going to sue them for letting my homicidal wife have unsupervised access to my mother. I signed so many forms my hand cramped, talked to so many lawyers I started forgetting their names, and generally discovered that almost dying is somehow more paperwork intensive than actually dying would have been. Mom, meanwhile, was recovering again, this time with the kind of monitoring usually reserved for heads of state or people in witness protection. She couldn't talk much yet, but she squeezed my hand and gave me this look that said everything. "I told you so, but I love you anyway, and we'll get through this." Classic Grace Thompson, managing to be right and supportive simultaneously, even while hooked up to more tubes than a science experiment. Detective Morrison called later that evening with an update. "The DA's filing charges tomorrow," she said. 8 counts including reckless endangerment, interference with medical equipment, and criminal negligence. Given the evidence and the premeditation, they're asking for significant jail time. I thought you'd want to know before it hits the news. The news. Right. Because of course this was going to be news. Woman nearly kills mother-in-law by Googling murder techniques was exactly the kind of story local news lived for. I thanked her, hung up, and stared at my phone, waiting for my life to become a public spectacle. Miranda was going down, and she was taking any remaining shred of privacy I had with her. The trial started on a Monday, because apparently the universe has a sick sense of humor and wanted to ruin the beginning of my week in the most spectacular way possible. The courtroom looked exactly like every courtroom you've ever seen on TV. Wood paneling, uncomfortable benches, that weird smell of old books and desperation, and a judge who looked like she'd seen every kind of human stupidity imaginable and was thoroughly unimpressed by all of it. Judge Patricia Hernandez had a reputation for being tough but fair, which in legal terms means she didn't tolerate nonsense and had zero patience for people wasting her time with obvious lies. Miranda showed up dressed entirely in white, and I'm talking head to toe white like she was auditioning for a toothpaste commercial or trying out for the role of innocent angel in the world's least believable play. White blazer, white blouse, white pants, probably white underwear for all I knew. The whole ensemble screamed, "I'm pure and innocent and couldn't possibly have done anything wrong." Her lawyer had clearly coached her on looking sympathetic, but the effect was more cult leader than wrongly accused victim. She'd even styled her hair differently, softer and more demure, like if she looked sweet enough, everyone would forget she'd literally Googled how to disable life-saving medical equipment. Her defense attorney was this guy named Robert Chun, and he had that slick, confident energy of someone who defended guilty people so many times he could do it in his sleep. Expensive suit, perfect hair, the kind of voice that probably convinced juries that Up was down and Black was white on a regular basis. He opened with the sympathy card, painting Miranda as this overwhelmed, anxious woman who'd made an innocent mistake in a stressful situation. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, gesturing toward Miranda like she was a fragile piece of art. "My client is not a criminal. She's a woman who made an error in judgment, a momentary lapse during an incredibly difficult time. She suffers from severe anxiety, and the hospital environment was triggering for her. She simply tried to reduce a source of stress without realizing the consequences." I wanted to stand up and scream. She Googled it. She literally researched the consequences, but apparently that's frowned upon in courtrooms. So I just sat there grinding my teeth and trying not to spontaneously combust from rage. Josh was next to me in the gallery, providing moral support and occasionally muttering commentary that made me want to laugh despite the circumstances. When Chin finished his opening statement, Josh leaned over and whispered, "Is he serious? She's dressed like a cult leader and he's acting like she's a victim of circumstance. This is wild." Then came the prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Karen Liu, and let me tell you, this woman did not come to play. She was maybe 5'3", looked like someone's nice librarian aunt, and had the kind of quiet intensity that suggested she could destroy your entire life while maintaining perfect posture. She stood up, walked to the jury box, and said in this calm, measured voice, "The defense would like you to believe this was an accident, an unfortunate mistake made by a confused, anxious woman. But the evidence tells a very different story. A story of premeditation, research, and deliberate action. A story where someone valued their own comfort over another person's life." She laid it all out like she was teaching a class. The security footage showing Miranda deliberately disconnecting the cable. The phone records showing days of research. The testimony from Dr. Patel and Nurse Hannah about how the equipment was clearly labeled and how disconnecting it required deliberate action. The timeline showing that Miranda had searched how long before patient reacts if alarm off, just 30 minutes before I left the room, proving she knew exactly what she was doing and what would happen. Every piece of evidence was another nail in the coffin, and I watched the jury's expressions shift from neutral to skeptical to outright disgusted. The hospital staff testified first, and they didn't hold back. Nurse Hannah, who'd been so sweet and caring with my mom, turned into a stone-cold professional on the stand, describing in clinical detail exactly what had been disconnected, why it mattered, and how Miranda's actions had directly caused my mother's cardiac arrest. Dr. Patel explained in terms even a kindergartner could understand that the alarm system was the only thing standing between a patient and potential death, and that disconnecting it was like removing someone's parachute mid-skydive and hoping they'd figure out how to fly. When it was my turn to testify, I felt like I was about to pass out. Public speaking has never been my thing. I once had a panic attack giving a presentation in 8th grade, but this was different. This was my chance to tell the truth, to make sure everyone understood what Miranda had done. The prosecutor asked me to describe the events of that night, and I did, trying to keep my voice steady even though my hands were shaking. I told them about leaving for coffee, about the phone call, about running back to find my mother flatlined and Miranda standing there scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. Then came the cross-examination, and Chun tried his best to make me look unreliable. "Isn't it true that you and your mother have always been extremely close?" he asked, like being close to your parent was somehow suspicious. "And isn't it possible that you're exaggerating your wife's actions because you're angry about your mother's illness?" I looked right at him and said, "My wife researched how to disable medical equipment, disabled that equipment, and my mother almost died as a direct result. Those are facts, not emotions. The security footage doesn't lie. The phone records don't lie. The only person exaggerating anything in this courtroom is you, trying to make attempted murder sound like a whoopsie-daisy moment." Judge Hernandez actually cracked a tiny smile at that, though she quickly covered it. Chen looked flustered, tried a few more questions, then gave up and dismissed me. As I walked back to my seat, I made eye contact with Miranda for the first time since the trial started. She was staring at me with this expression of betrayal, like I was the bad guy in this scenario, like I'd somehow wronged her by telling the truth about what she'd done. I stared back, letting her see every ounce of disgust and disappointment I felt, and then I sat down and didn't look at her again. The prosecution's closing argument was devastating. Liu walked the jury through the timeline again, emphasizing the premeditation, the research, the deliberate choice to disable equipment Miranda knew was keeping someone alive. This wasn't anxiety, she said, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. This wasn't a mistake. This was a conscious decision to prioritize personal comfort over human life. The defendant knew what she was doing. She researched it. She planned it. She executed it. And if not for the fortunate timing of a nurse's routine rounds, Grace Thompson would be dead, and we'd be having a very different trial right now. The defense's closing was weaker, recycling the same anxiety excuse, trying to paint Miranda as a victim of circumstance and mental health issues. But you could see it wasn't landing. The jury looked unconvinced, some of them actively annoyed that Chen was still trying to sell them this narrative when the evidence was so overwhelming. When he sat down, even Miranda looked like she knew it was over. The jury deliberated for exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes. I know because I watched the clock the entire time, each minute feeling like an eternity. Josh bought me coffee and a sandwich I couldn't eat, and we sat in the hallway waiting for the news that would determine whether my wife went to prison or walked free. When they called us back in, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Has the jury reached a verdict? Judge Hernandez asked, and the foreperson stood up, a middle-aged woman who'd taken copious notes throughout the trial. We have, Your Honor. What say you? We find the defendant guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted in whispers and movement. Miranda's face crumbled, tears streaming down her cheeks as the reality hit her. Her lawyer looked resigned, like he'd known this was coming but had to go through the motions anyway. Judge Hernandez banged her gavel, calling for order, and proceeded to sentencing without delay. Miss Thompson, she said, looking down at Miranda with an expression that could have frozen lava. You deliberately endangered someone's life for your own convenience. You researched how to do it, you executed your plan, and you showed no remorse until you got caught. 8 years in state prison. Bailiff, take her into custody. Miranda sobbed, proper dramatic sobs that would have won her an Oscar if this were a performance. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked at me one last time, and I might have, definitely did, say loud enough for her to hear. Save the tears, honey. You'll need them for prison laundry day. Josh snorted so hard he choked on his coffee. Several people in the gallery tried to hide their laughter, and even Judge Hernandez looked like she was fighting a smile. As they took Miranda out of the courtroom, still crying and protesting her innocence to anyone who would listen, I felt this strange mixture of relief and emptiness. Justice had been served, my mother's near death had been avenged, and my marriage was officially over in the most public, humiliating way possible. But somehow, watching my wife get led away in handcuffs, I didn't feel victorious. I just felt tired. Tired and ready to move on with whatever came next. Mom survived. Barely. And when I say barely, I mean the doctors kept using phrases like miraculous recovery and defied the odds, and other terms that made it sound like she'd beaten death in a cage match and lived to tell the tale. Which, honestly, she kind of had. After 3 more weeks in the hospital, 2 in ICU and 1 in regular recovery, they finally cleared her to go home with approximately 17,000 instructions, enough medication to stock a small pharmacy, and a strict warning that she needed round-the-clock supervision for at least the first month. Since I was freshly divorced, unemployed from taking so much time off work, and living alone in a 2-bedroom apartment that suddenly felt way too empty, moving Mom in was the obvious solution. The first morning she woke up in my guest room, I heard her shuffling around at 6 a.m., which was both impressive and terrifying given that she'd almost died 3 weeks ago. I rushed in to find her trying to make her bed with the kind of determination that suggested she thought hospital corners were a matter of life and death. Mom, what are you doing? You're supposed to be resting. She looked at me with that expression that said I was being ridiculous and also maybe dropped on my head as a baby. I've been lying down for a month max. If I rest anymore, I'm going to fuse with the mattress. Then she smiled, that classic Grace Thompson smile that had gotten her through single parenthood and multiple recessions, and said, "Guess God wasn't done teaching you lessons about women." I couldn't help but laugh, even though it was way too early for existential humor. What's that supposed to mean? It means you picked a real winner, kiddo. Most people get dumped or divorced over normal stuff like money or different life goals. You got divorced because your wife tried to murder your mother with hospital equipment. That's got to be some kind of record. She said it so casually, like she was discussing the weather or commenting on a mediocre TV show, and that's when I realized we were going to be okay. If Mom could joke about almost dying, we could get through anything. Recovery was slow, the kind of slow that makes you appreciate every tiny milestone like it's a major victory. The first time Mom walked from her bedroom to the kitchen without needing to sit down halfway through, we celebrated like she'd won the Olympics. When she could shower without me standing outside the bathroom door having a panic attack. Champagne. Well, sparkling cider because she was on blood thinners, but still. Every day brought small improvements, tiny victories that added up to something resembling normal life. The nurses from the hospital started calling her the Miracle Lady, and Mom absolutely loved it. She'd answer the phone for follow-up appointments and introduce herself that way. "Hello, this is Grace Thompson, also known as the Miracle Lady. How can I help you?" Josh became a regular fixture at our apartment, showing up at least 3 times a week with coffee, food, and entertainment. He'd walk in, hand me a latte that I desperately needed, and say something like, "Man, you dodged a bullet. And by bullet, I mean your wife. Actually, you didn't dodge it so much as took it in the chest, but at least you survived." His way of cheering me up involved a lot of dark humor and reminding me that things could always be worse, which was surprisingly effective. Mom loved him because he treated her like a regular person instead of a fragile invalid, challenging her to card games and losing on purpose in a way that was so obvious it became hilarious. One afternoon, Josh brought over his sister Rachel, who was a physical therapist, and offered to help Mom with her exercises for free. Rachel was basically Josh in female form, sarcastic, kind-hearted, and unable to take anything too seriously. She worked with Mom 3 times a week, encouraging her through the painful stretches and breathing exercises while making jokes that had Mom laughing so hard she'd have to stop and catch her breath. "If you can laugh this hard, your lungs are doing great," Rachel would say, demonstrating some complicated arm movement that was supposed to help with circulation. "Keep this up and you'll outlive all of us out of pure spite." But the whole experience left scars, the invisible kind that don't show up on x-rays or medical charts, but are just as real as any physical wound. I started having nightmares about that night, dreaming that I came back to the hospital too late, that Mom was already gone, that I had to live with the guilt of leaving her alone with Miranda. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, and have to physically check on Mom to make sure she was still breathing. After the 4th night in a row of this happening, Mom caught me standing in her doorway at 3 in the morning and said, "You need therapy, kiddo. This isn't healthy." She wasn't wrong. I found a therapist named Dr. Ellen Rodriguez who specialized in trauma and family issues and started going twice a week. At first, it felt weird, sitting in her office with its calming blue walls and strategic box of tissues, talking about my feelings like I was in a Lifetime movie. But Dr. Rodriguez was good, really good. She didn't judge, didn't offer hollow platitudes, just listened and asked questions that made me think about things from different angles. "You're carrying a lot of guilt," she observed during our 3rd session. "Guilt about leaving your mother, guilt about not seeing the warning signs with Miranda, guilt about choosing your wife over your mother's concerns for years. But guilt is just fear wearing a different costume, and fear is what we do with it that matters." Through therapy, I realized that sarcasm was my coping mechanism, and Mom's too. We used humor as a shield against the darkness, as a way to process trauma without drowning in it. When things got too heavy, we'd crack jokes. When the reality of what almost happened threatened to overwhelm us, we'd make fun of it until it seemed absurd instead of terrifying. Dr. Rodriguez called it defensive humor and said it was actually pretty healthy as long as we also dealt with the real emotions underneath. So we did both. We laughed and we cried and we talked about the hard stuff in between the jokes. The hospital called about 2 months into Mom's recovery. It was Dr. Patel, sounding both professional and slightly uncomfortable. Mrs. Thompson, we'd like to use your case in our nurse training program. What happened to you? The equipment tampering, the delayed response time, all of it has revealed some serious gaps in our protocols. We want to make sure it never happens again to anyone else. Would you be comfortable with us including your story in the training materials? Mom didn't even hesitate. Sure, as long as you name the module, How to Spot a Moron in Heels. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear Dr. Patel trying to figure out if she was serious. I'm joking, doctor. Mostly. But yes, absolutely use my story. If my near-death experience can prevent someone else's actual death, then it wasn't completely pointless. They ended up calling it the Thompson Protocol. New rules about equipment monitoring, stricter visitor policies, mandatory checks on all alarm systems, and immediate investigation of any disconnect. Every nurse in the hospital system had to go through training that included Mom's case as a cautionary tale. She was simultaneously proud and horrified to be famous for almost dying because her daughter-in-law was petty. At least I'll be remembered for something, she joked when we received the official documentation about the protocol. Most people just get a bench dedication in a park. I got an entire safety procedure. Living together brought us closer in ways I hadn't expected. We fell into routines. Morning coffee where she'd critique my brewing technique. Evening TV where she'd provide running commentary on cooking shows. Weekly card games that got increasingly competitive as her strength returned. We talked about everything. Her marriage to my dad who died when I was 10, her struggles as a single parent, my terrible judgment in romantic partners, the meaning of life, whether hot dogs counted as sandwiches. The deep stuff and the ridiculous stuff, all mixed together in conversations that lasted hours. Josh continued his regular visits, and somewhere around month 3, I noticed him and Rachel spending a suspicious amount of time together during Mom's physical therapy sessions. When I called him out on it, he got defensive in that way that confirmed my suspicions. I'm not. We're just, shut up, dude. Your mom's recovery is enough drama without you playing matchmaker. But I saw them exchange numbers, saw the way he smiled when he texted her, and filed it away as a nice thing happening in the middle of all the chaos. If something good could come out of this disaster, I was all for it. I started working again, doing freelance marketing from home so I could still be around for Mom. The money wasn't great, but it was enough to keep us fed and cover the mountain of medical bills that insurance hadn't touched. Mom felt guilty about the expenses, but I reminded her that she'd raised me alone while working 2 jobs and eating ramen so I could have school supplies. Consider this payback for 18 years of sacrifice, I told her. Plus, you're way better company than Miranda ever was. You actually laugh at my jokes instead of rolling your eyes. That's because your jokes are terrible and I find your suffering amusing. She shot back, but she was smiling. The divorce was finalized while Miranda was in prison, which made the paperwork significantly easier since she couldn't exactly show up to contest anything. I signed the documents with Josh as my witness, and that was that. 5 years of marriage reduced to a stack of legal papers and a cautionary tale about vetting your partners more carefully. Well, Josh said, raising his beer after we dropped off the final documents. At least you'll have a great story for future dates. My ex-wife tried to murder my mom is definitely a conversation starter. If I ever date again, I said, which I'm not sure I will. My judgment is clearly terrible. Your judgment was fine until it wasn't. Mom interjected from the couch, where she was working on a crossword puzzle. You loved someone who turned out to be awful. That doesn't make you stupid, it makes you human. Just maybe next time, introduce them to me before you propose. I'll vet them properly. And somehow, despite everything, the trauma, the betrayal, the near-death experience, the trial, the recovery, we laughed. Because that's what we did. We picked up the pieces, made jokes about the sharp edges, and built something new from the wreckage. 1 year later, Mom's garden is back to life and looking better than ever. She's out there every morning, watering her plants and talking to them like they're old friends, which her doctor says is great for her mental health, and I say is proof she's always been a little eccentric. She even planted new roses and named one Miranda, because as she put it, it looks nice from a distance, but has thorns that'll kill you if you're not careful. I can't argue with that logic. I visit the hospital sometimes to drop off cookies for the staff who saved her life. They installed new monitoring systems after what happened. Every alarm disconnect now sends an immediate alert to multiple stations, and visitor access to equipment is basically impossible. They call it Grace's rule, which Mom finds hilarious and slightly embarrassing. I'm famous for almost dying, she says. That's not exactly the legacy I was going for. Miranda still sends letters from prison. I don't open them. The last one I returned to Cinder with a note that said, "Sorry, the heart you tried to kill is still beating." Maybe that was petty, but honestly, I've earned some pettiness after everything. Sometimes people ask if I've forgiven her. I tell them this: forgiveness is overrated. Laughter is cheaper, therapy is healthier, and revenge looks better when your mom's alive to enjoy it. We're doing okay, better than okay, actually. Mom's thriving. I'm healing, and we've both learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about showing up, staying present, and definitely not Googling how to disable medical equipment. Life goes on. Hearts keep beating. Gardens keep growing. And some stories, no matter how dark they get, end with the good guys winning and the bad guys exactly where they belong.